On Friday, we did workbook 4.5 and 4.6, where we looked at equivalent fractions and also looked at going from mixed numbers to improper fractions and improper fractions to mixed numbers. Okay? There is an application to that equivalent fractions that you know about because you've used it to add fractions and subtract fractions and mixed numbers before. But the first application usually of that equivalent fraction thing is to let you compare fractions. So if I had the fraction 4/5 and I had the fraction 2/3 and I needed to compare them, okay, what I can do is I can write equivalent fractions, okay? I know these are both, one away from being a full shape, and I'm feeling pretty confident that this one is greater. And there's a couple ways I can check this, okay? One of the ways to check it is to write equivalent fractions where they both have the same denominator. Okay, so if these were both 15ths, then they would have the same denominator. And how many 15ths would this be? Well, in order to make this 15, I'd have to multiply it by 3. And I'm going to multiply the 4 by 3. So I have 12 15ths. Okay, how do I make this 15ths? I'm going to multiply by 5. And then I'm also going to multiply by this by 5. So I have 10 15ths. And 12 15ths is greater than 10 15ths. So 4/5 is greater than 2/3. Okay? Now, when I'm asked to compare or order fractions, I have choices. Okay? One choice is to look at them and just decide which is greater. Now, how could I do that? Well, let's say I have 1/4 and I'm supposed to compare it to 3/5. Okay? You could totally do what I just said, where I get a common denominator and I figure it out from there. So when I'm trying to compare and order fractions, I can do a common denominator using equivalent fractions, right? Common denominator using equivalent. Another method I can do, though, is just ask myself, ask more or less than half. A lot of times that will let you get through these questions. So what's half of 5? 2.5, right? Is half of 5. So that means that 3/5 is more than half. What's half of 4? 2. That means 1/4 is less than a half. So if this fraction is more than a half and this fraction is less than a half, that means that this fraction is greater. Okay, so this method will work every single time. This method works sometimes, other times it's a little bit harder, because when I was looking at these, they were both more than a half. Half of 5 is 2.5, so 4 is more than a half. 4/5 is more than a half. And half of 3 is 1.5, so 2/3 is more than a half. They were both more than a half, so that method didn't help me. But this also took more time than just asking myself that. Okay? There are other things you can do to help you solve them mentally. Do you remember when we started, I said I'm pretty sure this one was greater? Because what I was thinking was, well, these are both just one piece shy of being the whole thing. So this was 4/5, and this one was 2/3. So I knew this one was going to be greater because the piece short of the whole thing it was a smaller piece than that. Now that's pretty abstract, and you might not be able to do that mentally. And if you can't, just go back to this. Make equivalent fractions. Okay? What about if I need to order them from least to greatest? So let's say I need to order 1/2, 3/8, and 1/6. Okay, whoops, 3/8, 1/2, and 1/6. How do I order these? Well, now I have 3 things. So going back to that equivalent fractions is probably a pretty good idea. So I need a denominator. What's a good way to get a denominator? Well, a good way to get a denominator is to start to think about what these numbers have in common. I could use the tree thing to help me figure out what factors they have in common, or I have a little trick. I take the biggest number and I start counting by it. 8. Okay, this can become an 8. This can't. 16. This can become a 16. This can't. 24. That can be a 24, and that can be a 24. So I have a common denominator now. Now, why did I pick the biggest number? Just because if I start with a smaller number, I'm going to have to count more, because there's things that it won't be able, that it won't work until I get to a bigger number. So if I start with the bigger number, it goes faster. Okay, so now how do I make the 2 into a 24? I'm going to multiply it by 12. I have to multiply the numerator by 12. I have 12 24ths. I multiply this by 3. I multiply this by 3. I get 9 24ths. I multiply this by 6. I multiply 4. 6 times 4. I multiply 1 by 4. I get 4 24ths. Okay, so which one's the smallest? This one. Am I going to write this? Nope. I'm going to write 1/6. And then I'm going to write 3/8. And then I'm going to write 1/2. And I used equivalent fractions to help me order them from least to greatest. If I were supposed to order them from greatest to least, the list would have just been reversed. And that is the last section of this chapter. So this video is posted for Sunday evening. You watch it, we'll do this assignment Monday, and then we will review some of chapter 4, so you won't have a new video Monday night. Have a great weekend.